Chairman. Chairman Cole with 1598.
Thank you, Madam Chair. 1598 requires that to register to vote in state and local elections, proof of citizenship be shown. I would make it a blanket requirement. However, for some reason, a federal judge has already ruled that for federal elections, you can't require somebody to show proof of citizenship, which makes no sense to me, but a lot of federal rulings don't make sense to me. But anyways, we drafted the legislation to try to make sure we didn't run afoul of the federal courts. It would simply require that proof of citizenship be shown in order to register to vote. I brought this because of this past year we were shown evidence of many non-citizens who had registered to vote, and some of them had actually voted in Virginia elections. And I think part of it is due to motor voter registering at DMV. I think some are inadvertently being registered to vote at DMV. Part of the problem is, I think, with DMV procedures, because if you say you don't want to register, then it kind of asks you, are you sure you don't want to register? So anyways, that's what the bill does. It simply requires that proof of citizenship be shown to register to vote in state and local elections.
Thank you, Delegate Cole. Do we have anyone that would like to speak in opposition or in favor of House Bill 1598?
I, Hope Mesford, I represent the ACLU of Virginia, and we're speaking in opposition to the bill. We believe that because you can't administer this in federal elections, it's seeking to create a two-tier system in Virginia, which would be an onerous and burdensome system to basically administer and then implement, cost taxpayers, and really just create a mess on election day or in registration. There's also no evidence, in our opinion, that this is a problem, so we're opposing the bill. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair and members of the subcommittee, Garda Cortez, the Commissioner of Elections. We do have some very big concerns. Delegate Cole mentioned the issue of the federal court decisions. I think coinciding with that are decisions where Kansas, which the delegate mentioned, moved to impose the citizenship requirement simply for state and local elections, and to create this sort of two-tiered system. And that also, that sort of system was put on hold in the federal courts, and it has been put on hold in other states. And I think we don't need to look a lot further than Virginia for court decisions where we've tried to implement kind of dual registration systems before, and the court has said there's really no basis, no rational basis for setting up a separate system for qualifications in state and local elections versus federal elections. And so we do have a case shortly after the abolishment of the poll tax, where the state attempted to set up a dual process where individuals still had to pay a poll tax for participation in state and local elections. And that was struck down by the federal court here in Virginia, again, because this concept of kind of dual registration systems has been not upheld by the courts either here or in other states that have attempted this. So we do have some very strong concerns over the implementation of this, and the fact that it will probably, as with other requirements, be struck down by the court. Thank you very much.
Good morning, Madam Chairman, members of the committee. Carol Naga with the League of Women Voters, and we also oppose this bill. The dual registration system can be very confusing and is certainly under litigation. And we feel that anybody who's illegal this would be the last thing they want to do, is to try to vote or register to vote without citizenship. So we definitely oppose this.
Morning, Madam Chairwoman and committee. I'm Kim Bobo. I'm the Executive Director of the Virginia Interfaith Center for Public Policy. We oppose this bill. We are concerned it would make it harder for people to vote, and we do not believe there's any widespread problems of extra people voting that shouldn't be. And as somebody who's worked in a congregation and tried to help people find their birth certificates and other documents, we just don't want to create barriers for people, and we believe this bill would. Thank you.
My name is Joseph H. McClung from Rich Creek, Virginia. So I got up early this morning to get here. I support your bill, and the reason for this, in 2012, me and my friend named Bill Johnson was going through Indianapolis, Indiana, and they tried to register people there, trying to register us to vote in the 2000 presidential election. And we didn't do it. But later on, I found out later, it was on the news that they arrested some people out there for voter fraud and everything. I was in Indianapolis. But I support this bill. If the voter fraud can be easily done, I checked at the voter register at Harrisburg and asked certain questions about how voter fraud it can happen. It happened to me. And we need to put some kind of ID behind it.
Thank you, sir. Any questions from our committee? Morning.
Deborah Wheeler, Vice Chair of the State Board of Election. I stand to support this bill in the extreme sense. We need to have absolute surety of who's on our voting rolls. In many states, people get driver's license who are not citizens. I'm not saying that happens in Virginia, but it's certainly possible. Without proof of citizenship, we can have people who are not citizens voting. Most people who are alive and age eligible to vote have some sort of proof of citizenship. You have to have that for Medicaid, Medicare, all the other things that we require proof of citizenship for. We certainly should have it for voting, to prevent those who are not legal citizens of the Commonwealth and of the United States from voting, as it says in the Constitution of Virginia. Thank you.
Just to wrap it up, I would like to point out that there's currently a kind of a dual voting system for in-person absentee voting, where in federal elections you don't need an excuse, and in state and local elections you do need an excuse. So if somebody goes and doesn't have an excuse, they will be provided with a federal-only ballot. So registrars are already doing something like this. And to be honest with you, I think it would be very rare that someone would register only in the federal elections if this were adopted. I think the default would become that they would just show their birth certificate or some other form, such as a passport, to register to vote. This would not be a problem. And even if it is, I think it would be mitigated because in Virginia we have, generally we have federal elections 1 year, and state and local elections are not on the same schedule, though, certainly special elections may end up on there, but I don't think this would be a problem or difficult to
Any questions from the committee? We have a motion to report. We have a second. All of those in favor of reporting House Bill 1598, please respond by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? No. Okay. The bill reports. Okay, Delegate Sickles, House Bill 2182. I don't think we have any other patrons out in the audience. Delegate Herring had this, the identical bill. Delegate Sickles wishes to strike House Bill 2182. Do I have a motion? Okay, do we have a second? All right, House Bill 2, all of those in favor of striking House Bill Bill 2182, please respond by saying aye.
Aye.
Block 2?
Yeah.
Right. House Bill 1425,
House Bill 1425 will change how we do the electoral college. At least two other states I'm aware of do this currently, and they allocate it based on who wins the congressional district. And then whoever wins the overall state gets the two extra at-large electoral votes. I believe Maine and Nebraska do something like this currently. And I think it would actually encourage increased voter turnout because I know, I've been contacted by people who vote in the rural areas of Virginia, and they feel like as far as presidential elections, that their vote really doesn't count because Northern Virginia has become so, greatly populated that they kind of, rule the state when it comes to presidential elections. And this, I think, would be a fairer way to allocate the electors, and it would be actually probably closer to what the actual vote is as far as the popular vote, and that's why I put it in.
anyone in the audience wish to speak on this bill?
Morning, Madam Chair. Noah Sullivan, Deputy Counsel to the Governor, here to voice the administration's opposition to the bill. We believe Virginia served well by keeping its full voting strength in the national elections, as evidenced by the interest that folks have in Virginia through the last few electoral cycles. So we'd be opposed to anything that diminished that voice for Virginia. Thank you.
Carol Nago with the League of Women Voters, and we also oppose this process, this sort of fractional process for choosing electors. One of the concerns is that if this was done, it could be the possibility that no candidate would receive a majority in the Electoral College. And as you know, if that happens, then the election of the president would go to the House of Representatives, and each state would get one vote for the president and vice president. And also, our congressional districts are often considered to be gerrymandered. So the selection of electors by congressional district could be considered gerrymandered also. And we are now working on redistricting reform that will be done after 2020 and after the next presidential election. So any change to the selection of electors should not at a minimum occur until 2020, after the redistricting, after using a reformed fair process. So in general, also the National League of Women Voters actually opposes the Electoral College in entirety. So thank you very much.
Hi, Hope Mascadell with the ACLU of Virginia. We are also opposed to this bill. The ACLU has been opposed to the Electoral College since 1969, based on a number of factors. It dilutes the principle of one person, one vote across many states, so we actually support a different bill on this block. So for those reasons, we would oppose this bill.
My name is Joe McClung, Rich Creek, Virginia. I've been down here before on this same subject. I also, by the proximity where I live at, I also go to the West Virginia legislature, talk about this subject, and also speak in Kentucky. I live in the coal producing area, and we have been discriminated against. Western Virginia has been discriminated against by the way the system is now, big time for many years. As a matter of fact, I was down at a gentleman named Cliff Moore. He's a House of Delegate member from West Virginia, and at Bernie Sanders rally in Kimball, he come up to me and said, he's a Democrat, by the way. He said, in order to stop this coal, we need to war on coal and other products. We want to also was in the Reynolds Times paper the other day, a guy named Ron King, he's a professor, I think, art professor from Radford. And he said that the way this current system is flawed. And he suggested go to proportional, like the state of Maine. He said he'll take with one. I wouldn't mind that, but I don't know. But anyway, that's his math and my math. But anyway, he was a Democrat kid going. He was one to change it. I also went to the anti-Trump rally at one called in Blacksburg on the 20th. And there I spoke to about 100 people there about, they were talking about the corruption in the system and whatever else. And I said, I told them that how this worked. As a matter of fact, I was on C-SPAN here a while back. They were talking about corruption in campaign finance. And I said that if you fix the campaign finance law by changing the electoral college system to the congressional district, and the lady at the other end of the line on C-SPAN said the electoral system was originally set up to prevent campaign corruption and everything else, but over the years, the states had changed their campaign laws and everything else at both state and federal level, and that's the reason why I'm standing here today. But Morgan Griffin, I even got a letter from Morgan Griffin here about the issue. This was dated December 10th, 2015. And one of the things he wrote right here, he said, I believe the system created by our founders has served well. The structure of the federal government was carefully laid out to appropriate, to reflect the opposing interests and protect the interests of smaller states. Eventually, it was a compromise because the smaller states like Rhode Island feared the power of Virginia and New York City, and they wanted to make sure their votes would matter. And that is a big word nowadays, matter. Black lives matter, all lives matter, everything. And I mean, the electoral system was set up to protect minorities, whether it's people or states or whatever. And it's got out of hand. One other thing, Senator Carrico stated last year that if the election would change, that President Obama wouldn't got but like 7 of the electoral votes. And I'm just wondering if the state of California had the law, would Tim Kaine be the nominee for President of the United States if they had, or, it's something to think about. And I really want to, I'm very much supportive of this bill, and I want to campaign for it, and somebody wants to use it as an item for election, I will. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to remind the folks in the audience, and I know we're here early and folks have traveled from a distance, but we need to keep our comments very concise and to the point and brief as possible, because we have really long agendas here in this committee, so appreciate your thoughts as well.
Madam Chairman, members, I'm Claire Wheel, State Board of Elections. I stand to support this bill because the purpose of the Electoral College, as the previous gentleman stated, is to provide representation to the Electoral College for all of the voters in a state. When Virginia takes a position that it's all or nothing, vast members of your community, of your constituents, have no say in the Electoral College. Watching the results come in from Virginia, you noticed how the results changed when the big dog of Northern Virginia jumped in. The rest of the people in Virginia also have a voice. Those who live in the coal countries, those who live along the south side, those who live in rural Virginia have a voice, and they need to have it spoken in the Electoral College. So I strongly support that the congressional districts be allowed to portion their votes along congressional district lines. Thank you.
Anyone else to speak in favor or in opposition to this bill? Okay, questions from the committee members? All those in favor, please respond by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? House Bill 1425 reports. Delegate Toscano, like to present your bill, sir?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I can't believe I get client emergencies at 7 in the morning.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, I'm getting client emergencies at 7 in the morning that take me out of committee meetings, sorry. So, this bill attempts to deal with a little problem we had last year in the aftermath of a terrible storm. There's no standard by which the state board or anyone can keep the voting rolls, registration rolls open in the event of an emergency. So this bill simply sets forth a way that that can happen, rather than it being some kind of political decision that gets made. The trigger point is the emergency. It's either declared by the president or by the governor, and it sets forth the arrangement by which the vote may extend past the closing date of the registration. And again, it's got to be by a majority vote of the state board. It defines emergency, so everybody understands exactly what the rules are. It's a simple bill that hopefully will make any future emergency something we can deal with more easily. So that's all I have on that bill.
Thank you, sir. Anyone in the audience wish to speak or opposition?
Question for Dave. On line 26, I'm sorry, line 25, the governor of another state, why would that, why another state would impact what Virginia would be doing as far as voting? Well, it has to be confirmed by our governor. So what would happen, say for example, West Virginia had a terrible flood, or Tennessee, or someplace far to the southwest, it wouldn't necessarily impact other part of the state, and we wouldn't be aware of it, but there's a state of emergency that could be called by that other governor. But the point is, and you know, you could strike that if you wanted to, but it still has to be confirmed by our governor. Right. Just curious as to why that was in there. Wisdom of the drafting folks.
Madam Chair, that language, how we define emergency for purposes of postponing elections, I'm not sure the history of it, but we do have that elsewhere in code.
Back down. Back in the existing language of that.
If we're going to do this, and I'm not sure that we need to, I mean, we had a problem and the court ordered the extension, so I'm not sure the system is broke. But if you're going to do this, I would think should be a unanimous vote of the state board, not just a simple majority vote.
Thank you, Madam, response to that. Well, here's the problem with that. Let's say one person stops it, and then you're foreclosed from going to court. What I'm trying to do is avoid going to court. You have three people who are conscientious people on this board. The reason I've got the board in here is a check against the governor just unilaterally being able to do it. I mean, that was the purpose of that. So to the extent, you know, people are always concerned about too much executive power. I don't want to have people have to go to court every time they want to extend an election. And I don't want to have the governor in total control otherwise of extending registration.
Yeah, but, the current configuration of the board, the majority of the board is the same party as the governor, so I'm not sure that this is in fact a check on abuse by the governor.
Well, if you want to change it, fine with me. I'm just trying to keep this out of a court. Because courts take time, take energy, and a lot of people around here think that it's the legislature should determine how these election procedures should go and not courts. So here's another way you can take it away from a court.
Madam Chair, I have an amendment on line 21, strike majority and insert unanimous. I made that motion.
All those in favor of changing that, accepting that amendment, please respond by saying aye.
Aye.
Yes, sir. If we were to go this route, let's say there's a terrible ice storm in the southwest. It's determined that at 11 o'clock, I mean, they moved the football game the past week, 2 weekends ago because of an ice storm. Would that affect, if they said we had to extend voting time, would that affect Hampton Roads, North Virginia? What was contemplated under a particular part of the Commonwealth, because they've got the emergency, or whether it applies to the entire state?
That is a very interesting question.
And I don't mean that to do any injury.
No, I know, that is a very
Because-
interesting
and I
question.
know exactly what you're trying to accomplish, and I would agree with what you're trying to do at the end of the day. But I could see, you've got a flood situation, like the example that you gave us down Hampton Road. Let's say you had something catastrophic with one of the tunnels, and someone couldn't get from, Peninsula back to, to South Side or vice versa. That doesn't affect Richmond or Northern Virginia or anywhere else. So I think that's why a lot of times it would take a long time to get a bill to where we want it, because there are unintended consequences. That would be my hesitancy in supporting it, even with Mark's amendment to make it unanimous. I like what the bill is trying to accomplish. I don't mind the latitude, but there could be, you could have, anyway, you give an advantage to one versus the other. That's right. I mean, that is a concern that I've had too. So I would defer to council to tell us what the parameters of what the board can do.
Madam Chair, Delegate Jones, in this situation, the way the bill is currently drafted, it would extend across the Commonwealth. But if we go back to the section about postponing elections for certain states of emergency, there is language that limits that to the areas that are affected by the emergency. So if you wanted to amend it, this bill, we could put that language in.
Madam Chair, if I could, I prefer not to do that today. And I don't mean to do any harm to your bill. I just want to make sure that we get it right and change the topic. We get other bills on this docket today. And if we could come back with an amendment next week, and David and I can talk maybe offline, I'd like to do that. I'm fine with that. We'll take it back for the day.
I'm afraid, Madam Chair, on this subject, that if you limit it to a certain area of the state, that may increase the political gamesmanship. I think if you're going to extend it for one area, you have to extend it for all, the entire state, in order to minimize potential political gamesmanship on this.
Mr. Chairman, I don't agree on this.
Yeah, and I would also like to know if there's any concerns by the state board or the registrars about getting the final voting list, that if you extend it like this for, up to another 7 days, that would just give you 2 weeks to finalize the list and get it out to all the local registrars. So that's another concern we have.
You've got that problem in any emergency, though, I think. I don't know if the registrars want to comment.
Mr. Chairman. Madam Chairman.
Delegate Simmons.
Just a couple comments on this. This was in federal court, and it did not move quickly. The federal judge has to learn Virginia law. This is not like going to a circuit court judge, because I guess federal courts have oversight over us, apparently. But to the chairman's concern about politics, the unanimous amendment would change that, I think. But I do think that this should be consistent with other provisions of the code that allow various treatment of elections in regions. And that's what we're going to look at over the next week, to see, to make sure that's consistent.
That's the plan. So if the committee's concurrence if we could take it 5 instead.
Pass by for the day, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. You're right.
All right.
I'm sorry. Also, 1955. House Bill 1955.
Chair and the rest of the committee members. And I do appreciate, Madam Chair, your willingness to put the other bill that I had before you to rest and allow me to pull it. 1955, while about elections, is about a different subject. I'm sure most of you remember when I'm sure most of you remember when the online registration system went down a few months ago. And there was some consternation about how to deal with the fact that some people were not able to vote. So my bill offers what I think is a very practical solution. And that is that if the voter registration system is not functioning prior to the deadline for registration, then however many days, hours it is not functioning, the deadline for registration online would be extended.
Anyone in the audience wish to speak?
Question for council. I mean, I suppose this is a different reason it would not qualify under the previous bill, Delegate Toscano's bill, is that correct?
I believe Delegate Toscano's bill does also address situations in which the registration system fails.
Excuse me, so that's another emergency, right? Yeah, but the difference is that I'm only talking about extending the online voting system for the time it was not functioning, not postponing an election because of an emergency, so it's a different section. But I understand your questions.
No one in the audience? Person who wishes to speak? Morning.
Good morning. Excuse me. I'm Kirk Showalter, the General Registrar for the City of Richmond. Having lived through the situation that the delegate was talking about, I understand the need for our voters to get on the online registration system. However, as the bill is drafted, it is not limited to the
Now,
online.
can you move just a little bit closer to the microphone?
I am so
Thank you.
sorry.
That's okay, it's all right. Folks have
I
trouble hearing.
have.
Okay, I bet.
Yes, ma'am.
Go ahead.
I'm so sorry. As it's drafted, it just says the registration records. It does not say online registration records. So as I understand the writing of the bill as currently drafted, it would file through the mail or in person or any other mechanism. There's also the consideration of situations such as what I have right now, which is for a special election, the registration records are only closed for 1 week prior to the election. So extending it, voter registration, up to and including election day would be problematic for preparing the poll books for the polls.
Good point.
Delegate Sickles?
Just as a comment, this is what the judge actually did do. I mean, when he was faced with this situation, he just extended it for the time that the system was down. That probably would be what would happen in the future too. I don't know. I noticed that this is by request, but I mean, you're trying to get at the same problem that we were discussing in the last bill. So maybe we could.
Delegate Cole?
Yeah, Meg, if we're gonna go forward, I'd like to go forward with just one bill. and I don't care if it's Delegate Corey's or Toscano's bill, just my own preference, and committee may disagree, but I think we need to have one bill if we're gonna go forward with this idea of extending the registration deadline. It needs to be limited as far as the time period, and I think if you're gonna extend the registration, you extend the registration for everybody. That's my opinion, because that will reduce the political gamesmanship, I think. There may be others that disagree with that, but I think if you're gonna extend it for one group, you need to extend it for everybody.
Have a motion. Five for the day.
Have a motion to pass 5 for the day. Do we have a second? All those in favor, please respond by saying aye. Delegate Corey, so if you could work with all the parties involved, I think that would be helpful.
Get with Delegate Toscano and see which vehicle you prefer to go forward with.
I appreciate the opportunity to do that, and I think that we also should talk to some members of the committee as well as staff, so thanks a lot.
Registrars.
Oh, and the registrar, we have a lot of people to talk to.
Yes. Thank you. Okay. Delegate Simon.
Good morning, Madam Chairman, members of the committee.
Warner.
I have House Bill 1482, which would enter Virginia, it would make us, I think, the 12th state to enter into a national compact where we would agree that to award our electoral votes to the winner of the national popular vote. Like I said, this bill's been enacted by 11 different jurisdictions so far, possessing 165 electoral votes. So about 61% of the way to what the compact would need to become effective. So it may become effective with or without Virginia, although I think Virginia ought to participate. Most recently, it was passed by the Arizona House, 40 to 16, and Oklahoma Senate on 57 to 4 votes. It's not a conservative or a liberal idea. It's happening in big states, in small states, and conservative states and liberal states. The basic premise behind the bill is, growing up, I always thought that the person who got the most votes in a democracy should win. That's how the outcome of most elections should go. Whoever wins the most votes wins the office. And then we learned, as you got to more advanced civics, around 7th, 8th grade, well, technically that's not how it works. Actually, we have an electoral college. It's sort of an old, it's a byproduct of a previous age, but wouldn't really, it's only once before ever, come out that the electoral college vote was different than the popular vote. So it's a practical matter, even though we have this electoral college that meets afterwards, it's really the popular vote that counts. It then came 2000, and we had a different outcome in the electoral college. We had the popular vote, but it's very, very close. Came down to a few hanging chads in Florida. And we thought that's probably pretty anomalous. I mean, how often could that happen again? And then, this year, we had a situation where the loser of the presidential election had, over 2 million, I think, I don't know exactly what the last count was, close to 3 million more votes cast for them than the person who won the presidential election. So it's sort of a trend that's going, I think, in the wrong direction. We're getting further and further away from the popular vote being reflected by the outcome of the electoral college. So the way this bill solves that, we could do a couple things. We could have a constitutional amendment to abolish the electoral college and just say the popular vote wins. Or we could join these other states in saying, hey, we're going to just agree. The Constitution doesn't tell us in Virginia how we have to allocate our electoral votes. We can do it any way we decide we want to do it. The General Assembly could meet and decide how we're going to allocate our electoral votes every 4 years. That's not how anybody does it anymore, but that's how they used to do it. I think there's some bills that say we ought to divvy it up by even smaller groups into congressional districts coming up. But what this bill says is we agree with, once enough states to control the outcome agree to join this compact with us, regardless of what the popular vote outcome in Virginia is, whatever the national popular vote is how we'll cast our electoral votes, our electoral votes. So that's the bill. In a nutshell, I'm happy to take any questions from the committee.
Thank you, Delegate Simon. Anyone in the audience wish to speak in favor of the bill?
Hope Amescada, again with the ACLU of Virginia, and we are here to support this bill. While we oppose the Electoral College, this bill sets a different benchmark to get us more in line with the one person, one vote principle. And as the delegate outlined, it would simply say whoever wins the national popular vote, that's how Virginia's electors would vote. And that's more in line with how our state and local elections are run. The person who gets the most vote wins. So for those reasons, we support the bill. Thank you.
I have a question for you. So you're saying that California or New York should dictate how Virginia might cast their 13 electoral votes?
No, that's not what I'm
If
saying.
Virginia voted for a Republican, those 13 electoral votes should go to the Republican. But the popular vote was for the Democrat, that Virginia should cast their votes against what the citizens of the Commonwealth voted for.
No, what I am saying is that the person who gets the most votes across the nation should win the race.
And you just answered my question. That's exactly what I asked.
No, I think that,
Excuse me, that is what I asked. I said if the popular vote is for another candidate and Virginia voted for the different candidate, you're saying that the Virginia electors should ignore the will of the people of the Commonwealth, voted in a majority for the Republican and for the Democrat if the other candidate won. That's exactly what this bill does. But what you're saying is it doesn't matter what Virginia says.
no, that is not, respectfully, that is not what I am
That's
saying.
exactly what
I
you
am
said.
saying that the votes of Virginians matter just as much as anybody else across the country, which is why the ACLU opposes the Electoral College. And while this bill does not eliminate the Electoral College, we would support a national popular vote. It sets a different benchmark to get us there.
And you said you want them to ignore the will of the people in Virginia by not casting the electoral.
No, sir, that's not how I would explain it.
That's
Thank
exactly
you.
what said. Thank you.
Madam Chair, can I just maybe, I know the question wasn't directed to me, but if I might just add a little bit to that, since it is my bill. The problem we've got with the current system is it's impossible to know what the will of the people of any particular state is, because so often, we've been lucky here in Virginia, the last several elections have been viewed as a battleground state, so a lot of time and attention has been paid to Virginia. But there have been many years when Virginia's been written off, and so nobody comes in campaigns here, and people don't bother to vote because, let's take an example of Texas. I don't know how many people would have voted for Hillary Clinton in Texas if they thought their vote in Texas would have made a difference. But everybody assumed it didn't matter. Texas electoral votes are going for the Republican candidate, so why bother? I don't know how many Republicans would have shown up and voted in Texas if they thought it really made a difference. But because of the way the Electoral College works, we don't know what the will of the people is because we're told this state's going to go this way, this state's going to go this way. It really distorts this whole concept of one person, one vote, when your vote becomes part of a block that you don't control.
Question. So your assumption is that because it is a Republican or a Democratic state, the converse works in California, New York.
That's right.
So I just don't buy the argument that, that if someone, you have a responsibility as a citizen to go to the polls and vote. If I'm influenced by my neighbor, then I have a right that people have fought and died for to go vote. And my vote has never been, I don't decide if I go vote or not because my vote doesn't matter. My vote does matter every time I cast it. So your bill, as I read it, and I have read it, it would say if Virginia went for the Republican candidate and the national vote was for the Democratic candidate, you're saying we would not cast our votes. If the majority of Virginians voted for one candidate, you would cast it for the other candidate. That's exactly what your bill does.
Right.
Isn't that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, just want to make sure I read it properly.
Because we want the electoral votes to be irrelevant. We want what matters to be the individual vote and make the electoral votes irrelevant.
What this bill here does is clearly undermines the electoral system of this country, and Delegate Jones, what you said is exactly correct. It will, they talk about gerrymandering congressional districts. This does it to whole states. And we live in a republic, not in a democracy, which is one of the definitions is mob rule. In 2012, and I'm going to tell you, I'm very Obama won the election by carrying 14 counties in key states to win the election. 14 counties to win the popular vote of those states in order to win the election. Okay, that is a form of democracy. That is not a form of a republic form of government. And what this does is undermines it. And I like to say, every country we promote democracy in is up in flames now, and they hate us. So no, we want to stick with the Electoral College, and I think I appreciate what you said, but it took the words out of my mouth. Thank you.
Anyone else who wishes to speak in favor or in opposition of House Bill 1482? We have a motion? And a second. All those in favor of House Bill 1482, the aye. You just respond by saying aye. Aye. All opposed?
Thank you.
Change how we do appointments to the State Board of Elections, and also change how the local electoral boards are appointed. Currently, in Virginia, what happens is whoever's in the governor's mansion, 2 members of the state electoral board, or whatever party the governor is, and the third one is the party that finished second in the governor's race. And the same goes for the local electoral boards throughout the state, that they reflect 2 majority governor's party, and then 1 the minority party. Those are nominated by local party officials and appointed by the court. This would change it so that the Speaker of the House gets 1 appointment to the State Board, the Senate Rules Committee gets 1 appointment to the State Board, and then the Governor gets 1 appointment to the State Board. And if all 3 of them are the same party, then the Governor's appointment would be a person, the party that finished second in the governor's race, to protect minority rights. And it would filter down to the same type of scheme in the local electoral board, where the 1 member would be whatever party the speaker is, 1 member would be whatever party is majority in the Senate, and then the governor, if they're all 3 the same, then there would be a guarantee that 1 member would be of the minority party. So that's basically what it is. My goal is to try to, I personally support a 2-term governor, and one of the reasons to many members oppose that is because of the appointive powers of the governor, and this would, I think, reduce the appointive powers of the governor, but also I think it would also takes into account the General Assembly, which is kind of ignored in the balance of power as far as the electoral boards go, and I think that would be a good thing. I think it would probably end up better representing on the electoral boards, the local electoral boards, the actual composition of the Commonwealth rather than the current system. So that's why I put it in.
Anyone in the audience wish to speak on this bill?
Morning, Bill Sullivan, Deputy Counsel to the Governor. The administration's opposed this bill. State Board is an executive branch board. We have separation of powers in 1776 in Virginia's Constitution. We cannot have the legislature choosing members of the executive branch boards. The legislature speaks through laws. The executive branch governs through the execution of those laws. The constitutionally, it is required that he have the authority to appoint the members. We believe this bill would be unconstitutional as an erosion on that separation of powers and the governor's constitutional duty to actually be able to execute the laws, and for those reasons, the administration opposes the bill.
Madam Chairman, Robin Lynn, speaking on behalf of the Goochland County Electoral Board, where I am secretary, and my apologies to the distinguished patron, I didn't get a chance to speak to him beforehand. I do not feel like I have the right to speak to the direction of this bill because I have a personal involvement in being a member of the Electoral Board. But I would ask you to consider two items in the bill. On line 37, where the current language of the code says, the Commissioner of Elections may employ the personnel required to carry out the duties imposed by the State Board of Elections. If you are considering changing the composition of the board, you might want to say the Commissioner of Elections shall employ, rather than being permissive, to require that the Commissioner hire the people who work for him, rather than having the administration hire people who work under the Commissioner. And in line 74, the judges shall promptly make such appointment after the receipt of the political party's appointment recommendation. You may be aware that the judges are not required to appoint from the list that's recommended. And if you were to say there, the judges shall promptly make such appointment from those recommended for appointment, you might better serve the Commonwealth in having this legislation move forward. Thank you.
I'm William Jenkins. I'm the General Registrar of Sussex County, a rural county in Virginia. I spent half the night thinking about whether this bill was going to be good for my county or not, and I come to the conclusion that I'm 100% for this. I think the House of Delegate appointment, the one that they would pick, would be good. And the governor's appointment, since the governor passed just recently, two of my next door neighbors became full-time registrars because of this governor. I think that would, I see no problem with this. And of course, the Senate, right now, it might be up for grabs no matter what. But I think this would be a good change. It would reflect more of how Virginia feels. Thank you.
Madam Chairman, I asked the gentleman about the constitutional issue. I mean, if you read the Virginia Constitution, I think it's Article 4 or something like that, about the gentleman mentioned about separation of powers. Isn't this unconstitutional in its face?
I'm not a constitutional lawyer. I can't answer that.
Anyone else in the audience?
Madam Chair, and that was going to be one of my questions for the chair. It's just, can you speak to the point raised by the council? Are there not other occasions where there is divided appointment powers?
There are other cases where there are divided appointment powers, and I don't think this would infringe on the governor's ability to run the department. I think, this would actually better represent the people of the Commonwealth. And again, this is the first I've heard of the constitutional issue being raised. No one has raised that objection to me before. And so I really, I think that's a red herring, to be honest.
Session? A motion to report and a second. All right, all those in favor of reporting House Bill 1399, please respond by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? All right, and the last bill on the docket is House Bill 1730. And I'm bringing this bill forward. What House Bill 1730 will do is require the State Board of Elections and work with the local electoral boards and the general registrars to come up with a list of criteria and descriptions of the responsibilities of each member of the electoral board. I think this is very important that they understand their duties and their responsibilities. And once we come up with the list of their duties and responsibilities, that list will be handed out to committee chairs and the state chairs of each party before they nominate folks to go onto the board. That list will also be given to the circuit clerks, and it will move on to the judges. These electoral board members have very serious responsibilities. State and federal laws have to be abided by, and a lot of times the chairs of the political parties don't understand how serious their jobs are and how much time it's going to take. So I do believe that this is an important step forward, and hope you'll support the bill.
All right,
I'm a little biased on the bill.
does, any questions from members of the committee? Any?
Have a motion on something.
All right, anybody wish to speak in favor or opposition to the bill?
Mr. Chair, Robin Lynn speaking on behalf of the Virginia Electoral Board Association and also on behalf of the GREB work group, which developed a proposal very similar to this. The description of the electoral board and responsibilities has already been completed by the GREB work group. The suggested change in the language of the Department of Elections form Elect 119 has already been provided and recommended to the State Board of Elections, which unanimously recommended it, accepted the report, and will be included in the report to be recommended to the State Board again in February. We wholeheartedly support this legislation.
Madam Chairman, I'd like to thank you, this is Clara Wheel of the State Board of Elections, for presenting this bill, which clarifies the duties as Secretary Lynn just described. I too sit on the General Registrar Electoral Board work group. We worked very hard to put this together. As many of you know, electoral board members frequently come to the board without any prior knowledge of their duties. The duties are not explained. They're not written down in writing anywhere that they can be handed and said that you must read this, you must understand it. This work group put together these descriptions and also a statement that every electoral board nominee must sign before he goes to the circuit court judge for appointment. We have seen countless mistakes, most recently the egregious behavior by the Lynchburg Electoral Board because they simply didn't understand what needed to be done before an election. This would clarify that, put it in code, and make sure that the members of the electoral boards who are running elections know before they take the office what the office entails. I commend the chairman for presenting this bill, and I support it wholeheartedly, as does the entire GRE work group. Thank you.
Chairman Scott McGarry, Secretary of the Electoral Board in the County of Arlington, and also a House Party Chairman. I commend this bill to you. Think it is a very important contribution. Hope it'll be your pleasure to recommend it.
Other discussion, Delegate Sickles?
Just a question, clarification. Having educated people doing their job is really important. So that sounds great, and I'm glad they had a work group that came to an agreement on what electoral board members ought to know with their education base. So this bill is just about formalizing that, so there's an ongoing training since the work has been done already. They've got some really good testimony here. Is this so it's ongoing, and there's a state who's going to have a training role, and it's going to cost money for us here?
There's no fiscal impact. It requires the State Board of Elections, the local electoral board, and the registrars to continue to work together, update that list as they need to, and make sure that, I think it's every 2 years, by December,
training for electoral board members, but for the purposes of the description of the duties and responsibilities, that may change from year to year as legislation changes, and that we would expect the Department of Elections would then update this form. What would stay, in fact, unchanged would be the requirement that nominees for electoral boards must read this list of duties and must agree and affirm that they will discharge those duties if they are capable of doing so.
All for that.
Any other discussion?
If I may also add, Mr. Chairman, that a copy, or an advanced copy of the review and duties was sent to each member of this committee by email yesterday.
Have a motion?
Move to report.
Motion and second to report. Any other discussion? All those in favor of reporting will say aye.